Welcome to Life on Life's Terms, episode 60. It's your host, Justin. We have a guy in here named Larry Skinner. Can I say your last name?
Sure.
So we're going to, he's also my sponsor. We're going to get into the Survivor's Guide to Staying Sober over the Christmas holidays, how to identify isolation, why meetings are so damn important, old habits and how not to fall into those traps, and then we're going to probably get into some readings from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But before we do that, I got to pay some bills, so shout outs to Liam Connolly at Connolly Law for all of your Canadian law, will, estate, and media issues. Google Liam Connolly at Connolly Law. For all of your counseling needs, such as addiction and family counseling, please Google adaras.ca. That's ADARS.ca. The famous Chris Suchit will be able to accommodate you through Skype or FaceTime for your mental health needs, regardless of where you are geographically. As well, we would like to give a shout out to Modern Gravity over the Christmas season. They do have some deals. 2 people can float for $99. This deal is only happening until the end of December. After the end of December, they ask you for a 3-month commitment of $39 a month, and that gives you basically one float a month and $50 for a partner to come with you for those floats, and then $20 for additional floats just for your own account. So thank you to all of our great sponsors out there. How's your morning going, Larry?
Well, a little too early to tell, but it seems to be okay.
It seems pretty good, doesn't it?
Yep.
So let's you and I talk about early Christmases. What was your early Christmas like in recovery?
Well, my early Christmas in recovery was, I went to the very first Christmas, the year I started getting clean, and I felt out of sorts with my family, right? It was me, but it wasn't my family, but I was there, and I believe my family and my sisters and brothers and all them were happy that I was there, because I had, very rarely shown up for any of these celebrations when I was using drugs or alcohol, right?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't been home. My home is in the eastern part of Canada. I haven't been home in years. A lot of that is because I owe debts or had time to pay to the wonderful Alberta government as well as the federal government, so I haven't been able to travel outside of the province and haven't done that. I always had the phone call, though, for Christmas, except for the latter years of my active addiction. That just didn't happen. So I always felt like I was out of the loop of Christmas or for Christmas with my family because I just was never really there. And when I was there, I was always drunk. How did it feel going into your first meeting for Christmas?
Well, there was a bit of sort of loneliness, sense of I needed something.
Yeah.
I needed to be around people, but kind of the right people.
Yeah.
So when you're in the rooms and sitting down there sharing your experience, strength, and hope, or looking for something, the rooms are the place to be, I find, because everybody's exactly like you in some degree, right?
Yeah.
And then when you get into the flow of the meeting, sometimes you hear something that perks you up and gets you going, right?
Well, and I think it's one of those, I think kind of in the beginning, it's one of those things where you really don't even want to be around those people. You feel so itchy, bitchy, and twitchy, like just so irritable, right?
Yep.
And I think the other thing is, and this is from working with guys, is they just want their families to accept them. They just think like, shit, I've been sober for four or 5 weeks now. Fuck, they should just want me back in. And I remember somebody very close to me in the rooms had said to me one time, he said, you were given that privilege once. You were given that from your family once, and you fucked it up. And now it's up to you to decide that you're gonna go and get that back. You know what I mean? You have to earn it this time.
Get
this
that
time,
respect.
Yeah, it's not coming back easily. So even to reflect back on those times when we were early in the rooms. Mm-hmm. It was difficult. I mean, I think my first Christmas I did so here in our location with the fellowship that you and I subscribe to, which is called Cocaine Anonymous. Yep. They do marathon meetings in this particular region. Mm-hmm. And I went to those marathon meetings like all the way through, because I was afraid to be alone for Christmas. It scared the living crap out of me to be alone for Christmas. And I mean really alone, because there was no substance to take me away from that, you know? I wasn't in a three-quarter house or halfway house anymore. I was living on my own. One of the guys that I was living with, one of my roommates, was from that three-quarter house. And it was lonely. I mean, I'm not gonna say that it wasn't, but there comes a fortitude, I think, with that. So like, even you were saying that you felt lonely from your family in early recovery throughout the Christmas period, but were you really isolated? Were you isolating yourself, or were...
Well, the first Christmas, I would have to say I was isolating myself. I was there, but not in true mind and body. And as soon as I could, I got out of there. And then, going whenever I wasn't at a meeting or at one of my family places, I was alone by myself. And at times I just had to get up and get to a meeting or get somewhere where there was other people, right?
Yeah.
Just to get a feeling of
unity,
or I'm there, right? Type
yeah.
thing. I belong, right?
Yeah, because I think that kind of happens too, where when we isolate, it's almost like grabbing salt and just rubbing it into the wound. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like that's, yeah. It's very self-inflicting when we start isolating. Did you, now looking back at your isolation though, could you tell, or looking back at it, is it easy to see what your mind thought, like what your thoughts were like in order to stay isolated? Do you know what those triggers look like today, like where your thoughts go?
Well, you just get to that point where you don't feel good about yourself, and there's, at that time I didn't pick up the big book a lot to read it or anything, or I still don't pick up the phone as much as I should to call people.
Yeah.
That's just the way I am. But it was entirely hard, and so that's why I went to the meetings, right? Mm-hmm. To go down to the meetings, you'd see someone you could sit there and talk with, even if you're not giving to the meeting, right? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And then you go outside after the meeting and talk to someone there, right?
Yeah.
And you listen to someone who maybe is even worse off than you.
Yeah.
Right? They've got no family or friends or whatever. And I've never been one to go, like, quite often they'll have somebody's house, a Christmas dinner, like one of the fellows in recovery, right?
Yeah.
And I've never done that. Maybe one of these years I will, but I certainly feel a lot better these days at Christmas than I'd ever had, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I owe that to the 12 steps of Cocaine Anonymous. The meetings I go outside of CA, and also I owe it to my daughter, right?
Yeah.
Always being there for me when, like just phoning me up when something's not going right, telling me her problems, and mine don't feel so bad, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the deal too, is that when we're running in that isolation, and I can tell when I'm running isolation through my life, I can find, or I can see that what's really happening is shitty committees kind of taking over. And we talked a little bit before in the show with the co-host Kenny about shitty committee might not be necessarily a bad thing. I kind of think now, I used to think like you want to fight shitty committee as much as possible, so on and so forth. But I kind of almost see shitty committee now as one of these things where when it pops up in your life, the reason why it's popping up is because your psyche, your mind, or your self-confidence is saying, listen here, you motherfucker. You need to go and change shit right fucking now, because you're getting beaten up. And if you don't change it, you're fucked. It's going to get worse. Yep. You got to listen to me. That's why I'm being so hard on you right now, And I think it's one of those things when we go through those early years of recovery through Christmas, there becomes a fortitude. And I said this in last week's show, this ain't getting any easier. You got to like it for what it is now, because what sobriety is right now, it's going to get better once you accept this process, right? And so your first Christmas in sobriety is only as hard as you make it. It may feel like you're missing out on something. It may feel like that, but I would suggest that if you feel that way, what you might want to look at is, have you actually done a set of steps? Because I can tell you right now, I have never found anything else that has given me a reprieve away from wanting to use, like the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous or whatever A is saving your ass out there, you know? So,
well, I believe the first Christmas I spent with my parents, I had not done a set of steps, right? So I was, the shitty committee was up there, and I was thinking all bad things, that I didn't fit in, and what am I doing here, right? Kind of thing. And I wanted to run away, but I stuck it out, right?
Remember how resentful you would get when you're watching somebody drink? Right? You just watch them drink and you're like, you motherfucker. Right?
Yeah, I'm sitting around the Christmas table and we're all drinking. I go, I can't touch that crap anymore. Jesus, right? Just, because I know if I have, it's the first one. That's the one that kills me.
Yeah.
If I don't touch the first one, then I'm okay, right? And all my brothers and my dad will have a wine, and that I'll have a Coca-Cola. That's my wine at Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's a fact of life now, and over the years I've come used to it, and I'd rather not drink anyways. Just how I feel, right?
Yeah.
Or use drugs anymore, right?
Yeah.
I see what it's like out there, right?
Well, and I think the other thing is too is we may still have had those old friends around us when in early recovery, so to say. So if you don't mind, Larry, can you disclose how many years you have in recovery now, just so that the listeners kind of have an idea?
Well, I'm 8.5, more than 8.5 years now. In January 3rd, I'll be taking 9 years clean and sober, right?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So I've been around for a while, and I still have a couple of friends that drink. If they smoke their pot, they don't smoke near me. Like the one lady I go to, she makes barbecues or cooks supper.
Yeah.
Why in the heck would I refuse that? Come on now.
Yeah.
Right. She's a damn good cook, so,
Yeah. Well, and I think, so at the table, there's 13 years sitting here worth of sobriety, conglomerately. And I don't discriminate against people who are using either at Christmas. Would I have did that in early recovery? Probably not. Just because I wasn't there. And it's about, I think in early recovery, you have to really keep in perspective where you're at and keep that honest moral mirror about yourself, as well as keep on, like, being honest about where you're really at. If I can go back to this time, I remember you were my sponsor at this time. I was in a Christmas kind of lunch to get together with my last survey firm that I worked for prior to going into this, and I remember texting you because they were all drinking at lunchtime, and we were doing the gift thing, and the only thing that you said to me was, you have the power to leave if you have to. And I was like, and I never thought in that moment, well, yeah, if I don't have to be here, I can leave. If there's no reason and purpose for me to be here, I don't have to hang out with these people. I can actually leave. That's my own decision, right? Nobody's spellbounding me to be there. Nobody's tying me up. Nobody's doing anything for me to specifically be there. And I think when you had said that to me, I didn't recognize that I could actually leave at any moment, right? And in early recovery, I think there's almost this bravado where you're like, yeah, I can hang with those 5 and 6 year guys. I can go to the bar and all that shit. But really, you can't. And I even remember, like, on my own, I couldn't. And I even remember as well, some people in the fellowship ended up going to a bar for New Year's Eve. And there were some of us where our feathers were ruffled, like, well, why weren't we all invited? Well, the fact of the matter is these guys with 15, 20 years worth of time don't want to be bringing people with 2 years of sobriety or a year of sobriety just jonesing while they're sitting at some blues fest or something for New Year's Eve, right? So, I mean, it's a give and take, right? And I think that is there anything that somebody had said to you in early recovery when you were going through these holiday seasons that kind of like turned on a light bulb for you at any moment?
Well, the only thing they said, and I actually went against what they said too, is that they said, well, in early recovery, don't go to a bar or a place where people are drinking. And of course, well, I'm not going to listen to that. I ended up on the Blues on White, and I think I had maybe 6 months clean. And I actually got the hell out of there after 20 minutes because there's a guy at the next table that reminded me so much of myself when I was drinking. He was
Yeah.
actually making a total dick of himself, right? And I said, holy smokes. I'm looking in the mirror a few months back, and that was that guy. So I love the blues, but I had to get out of it. I just couldn't handle it at that time, right?
So for the listeners, Blues on White is basically a bar here in the Edmonton area where a bunch of blues players come and play. It is world renowned. You can Google it. It's a pretty cool place. But no, I agree. I've ran into people too that remind me of me using an active addiction, and I'm kind of just like, now I can tolerate them. And I think the reason why I tolerate them better today is because I don't have those shortcomings and I don't have those personal character defects that I once had. So I can actually look at that person and say, you poor sick fuck, you know, like that's literally how I look at them. And that's taken a while. Like that doesn't happen right away. You have to almost just say, well, there's a positivity that comes from realizing that this thing is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And it becomes a way of life. I mean, everybody always wants to sit back and say, when do I get to relax? There is no relax. There's no day off of sobriety. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, you
and
practice these principles in all our affairs, right? It becomes part of your life, right?
to the best of our abilities,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Do you remember, let's go back to like some of the shitty Christmases that you had right before coming into active addiction, if you don't mind disclosing it. You don't have to if you don't want to.
I can remember one year when my brother wasn't going to make it. My older brother was always coming home drunk and whatever, right? And so I don't know, for some reason, I was drinking with some people and then phoned up the dealer to get some Coke. And I went to my dad's place and I was absolutely lit up, right? And I was just, he knew, and he was mad. And, you know,
Your dad was mad.
oh, he was pissed off, right? Because at Christmas, he makes an effort not to drink just maybe a bottle of beer or something, right?
Yeah.
So I basically took over from my older brother, you know, and a few Christmas followings. If I was there just for the unwrapping of the presents, and I was out the door because the drugs are much more important than Christmas or anything else, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember one Christmas I had called my mom, and when I was on the phone with her, she knew that I was pretty intoxicated, and I was like ripping rails basically, or doing cocaine while I was on the phone with her. She knew what was up. She wouldn't bring it to my attention on the phone because we were always afraid at that time that I was being listened to because of my previous occupation, well, in active addiction. And so she would give me that respect, like, you know.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that was one of the last times she ever answered the phone. And then the next time that she answered the phone, I was doing time for Christmas. And that was a direct result of active addiction. Kenny and I talked about that a little while ago and what that feels like. But I had really realized when I was sitting in that jail cell for Christmas with all these other convicts, it doesn't matter what kind of addict you were, whatever you were, we're all sitting in the same place, feeling the same shitty emotions. Yeah. And I think that's the same thing for the listeners who are listening to this. It doesn't matter what you've gone through, what your last bottom was like through Christmas. We all can talk about that feeling of despair, that feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of the loneliness when using the fact of being almost like abandoned by your family because they can no longer take your tragedy, right? It's always these tragedies, you know, and the stupidity, the insidious insanity of it all, right? Do you remember the one time when your family, did they ever take that step back from you at Christmas time because you were just too intoxicated for them?
Well, all I know is that if they phoned me once, and they wouldn't phone me again, right? And I can remember towards the end of my using days that, you know, I didn't go over for Christmas, and they didn't call, right? And but you know, I was still using drugs, so you know that I was in my basement doing rails and thinking that was the thing to do. But you know, I at this time I was coming to the point where, man, I didn't want to do this anymore. Yeah. Right. And how come the party there's only one person there? Right?
Yeah.
It's myself, right?
Yeah.
And so and to get back into the family function and go back into Christmas and Thanksgiving and all that stuff, it was hard at first, right? but it was me. It wasn't them, right? It was all me, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff in my head going around, and and then it got to a point after a couple of years where it wasn't that much of a problem anymore, but I still left early
Yeah.
because I'm going to meetings, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's something to do with the holidays that I have to go to meetings. It's just in me, right? Because I cause a lot of discomfort to my family, to myself, to my daughter when I was using at that time of year, right? Never set up a Christmas tree. I couldn't be bothered, right? I was never a Christmassy kind of guy anyways. And
Yeah.
here I am about face, and I'm going to set up a tree here in a day or two, right? So unbelievable, right?
Well, and I think even in the moment when you're saying like you were in the basement and the family wasn't calling you anymore. Remember in that time, and I think we can both kind of agree to this, is that it was all the family's fault for not calling
Yes,
us.
of course.
It wasn't us.
No.
Especially in active addiction, right?
Yep.
So I kind of want to flip this too for the family listeners who are listening. That's what's going on probably in the addict's mind. I'm not going to speak for every addict out there, but the reality is that's what's going on in their mind prior to ever seeing anything like AA treatment or whatever. Because so we say this all the time when people come in. We say, we fucked up your using for the rest of your life. Your using is never going to be the same. And the reason why it's not going to be the same, and I'm spelling it out like this, is because you were going to understand the responsibility of what you were doing to yourself and your family. That's why we fuck it up. And you will always feel that impending piece of like, oh wow, I'm really bringing them through the ringer. Before you didn't believe that because it was everybody else's fault but yours, right? So that's almost the compelling piece when somebody comes into the steps, and if God forbid that they relapse, but if they do relapse, that's usually the compelling piece of why they come back, is because they actually recognize the significance of what they're doing to their family in that moment, right? Especially if they make it to steps 4 and 5, right?
It just doesn't feel the same anymore when you're sitting there at the table doing your stuff, and I wonder what those people at CA or AA are doing, right?
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. Right?
And you recognize the casualties of your addiction, which is your family. Because before, remember, we used to sit in that place and we were like, I'm only hurting myself. What the fuck do they care? They don't understand my pain. And then you had every reason in the book to use, like, they didn't call me for Christmas,
And you think that, well, my daughter ran away from home, but that's her fault. I was being a good dad, right? Doing lines of coke, right?
And that's exactly it. I mean, in the moment of active addiction, that's where we're at. So I think this speaks to the family, and this also speaks to those who are using.
It's all their fault.
Yeah, it's all the family's fault, but really the family's sitting there saying, we can't take your tragedy anymore.
Your bullshit,
like you're a walking train wreck all of the time, right? And then remember near the end, how crazy we would be. We pick up blatantly in front of cops. We would just do stupid things, and I think a lot of that is because we're actually looking to get caught, so for a cry of help almost.
It's like doing coke in the backyard on a sunny day. Right? That could be part of it too, right? I can remember that. People go, "Well, you're crazy." I say, no, don't worry about it, right?
They know, but I remember I used to call so a part of this Insidious Insanity, and I didn't recognize. I was just talking to somebody a little while ago who's going through some stuff, and this is what I said to them. This is how crazy it is. The undiscussed acknowledgments that you have with others. So, as an example, I'll put it this way. I thought because I was the least violent drug dealer in a certain area that the police would just allow me to do what I was doing. That's not the truth.
No.
Or I thought because I was the least violent user, the police are less likely to stop me and bust me. That's not the truth either. They don't give a fuck who you are. All they care about is they've stopped you, you're going to jail, and they got a gram of coke or fentanyl or heroin or whatever it is off of the street.
Well, that's the same with me. I mean, I thought because I'm in my house or whatever, and most of the time it was isolated except for a few incidents where there was shit going sideways, that why would they bother with me, right? I'm not bothering anybody. Well,
yeah.
Technically I am, because, the people coming by, the family of the people that were there, right? And the guys outside we were scrapping with, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe the dealer that pulled the gun to let us know we had one, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the catastrophe or the casualty of coming from active addiction, right? So today, how do you recognize isolation is setting in for you?
How do I recognize? Well, I've taken a few things in my life, and like Cocaine Anonymous was great for me, but I take some outside meetings, which helps me. But how do I recognize isolation? You know what? If I've been doing the same thing for a couple of days in a row, I'm not contacting any of my clean and recovery buddies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or my oldest friend, Pat, who's, if I don't contact with these people, or if I don't pick up the big book,
Yeah.
or if I don't do some kind of service work, I know I'm isolating, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the part of the thing where if that happens, then I get in my car, or I pick up the big book, or I'll pick up the phone and talk to somebody.
Yeah.
One of those things, just to sort of get out of it, right? But I'm lucky nowadays because, I've got some hobbies, right? Which you're up. Photography, I'm going to take that up. I got a camera, kayak, right? So all that stuff will get me out on my own probably, or with a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is you can be isolated or you can be on your own. There's a difference, right?
And I think one of the things that comes from these kinds of hobbies is that you meet more people
Yes.
who aren't in recovery, just normal, so-called normal people, right? I can say for myself, when I know that I'm isolating, I feel anxiety about leaving. If I feel anxiety about leaving my house, almost like a agoraphobic state, I know that I have to push myself to a meeting, or I have to push myself to go for coffee with somebody or something. I have to get out. Sometimes I'll even put myself in a cafe and work. I mean, I'm pretty lucky where I don't have to show up to an office anymore. My laptop is basically my office, and I can take it wherever I want to work. So the second I start feeling like I have those like butterflies in my stomach because I have to get out.
Mm-hmm.
I just go, I have to push myself out the door. And if that's the only thing I do, I remember this too in early recovery, they said, if the only thing is today that you get to a meeting, then you've won. Right? So sometimes if I see myself isolating, and this kind of happened to me through house arrest, not being allowed to leave my house for just like any means. Like, sure, I was allowed to leave for business and I was allowed to leave for certain things, but because I wasn't allowed to go for coffee, or I wasn't allowed to do this, or I wasn't allowed to do that, what ended up happening was I started getting agoraphobic. I started getting anxiety about leaving because that isolation was pretty crazy to handle, knowing that I could only go to 2 meetings a week and I was only allowed to do this. And it was all consequential, a lot of it because of my actions, but it was almost detrimental in the fact of the isolation that I was feeling because of the consequences that were being passed to me by the province or by the country, right? I mean, it's of no fault of their own. That was the best way of giving me a sentence for the behaviors that I had in active addiction. However, that was the real consequence of it was that I really had to fight. When I was allowed to leave that door without telling somebody, I really had to fight that anxiety and those sweats. I remember the first time seeing a police officer off of house arrest, man, I damn near shit my pants. I was so afraid. I was like sweaty palms, the whole thing, right? Like I was just so afraid, right? So obviously meetings are a big part of not isolating. Staying in contact with that home group, so to say, get yourself a home group. Those old habits, let's talk about that. Those old habits that kind of arise. You ever see that in other people where we were talking about, we would see what they're doing. We're like, oh, fuck, here it comes, right? What are some of those old habits that you see from others that you kind of recognize from early recovery?
Just procrastinating is one of them, right? Not doing what you should be doing. And I still do that to this day on certain levels, but the beauty of it is, unlike you, I have some freedom during my addiction, right? So if I wasn't going to go to a meeting, then I'd get onto the townhouse and go for a walk for 10, 15 minutes and
Yeah.
just look at the sky, look at the trees, watch the people, right? That gets me out of me. And getting out of me is a good thing at times because when the shitty committee kicks in, it's very hard to get rid of, right?
Well, and I think now I really look at that shitty committee like now I have to deal with whatever this fucking thing's saying to me. Like if it's like, for instance, for a long time I've been battling my weight and trying to lose weight, so on and so forth. And shitty committee would just say horrible things to me, which is really me. And then what would end up happening was I wouldn't like acknowledge it. I would just say, no, Justin, you're a good guy, blah, blah, blah. And I would do that inventory of good stuff. And then what I realized was it's great to have that inventory of good stuff, Justin, but are you really being the best that you can be? Because if you're being the best that you could be, shitty committee won't be there. And when I recognized, guess what? When you wake up in the morning, you have to humble yourself. Then you need to get physical activity. Then you need to be emotionally stable. And then you can be of service. If you can do those 4 things, and that's your only goals in life is those 4 things, then you're going to be okay. There's no reason for shitty committee anymore. There's no reason to beat yourself up. So I think that was, and that only happened in the last, I would say like year 3, really, year 4 of recovery. So I had 2 years where I got through a set of steps, but I wasn't running it that way, And I think that comes from doing those big book studies time and time again, right?
It kind of drones it into you, right?
Well, yeah, especially because you got to practice what you preach, and when you're doing that, I mean, that's kind of the piece too. Is when you're doing that, you have to be an example to those that you're working with, right? So I'm gonna do a quick reading here from Alcoholics Anonymous, big book, page 52. It's like the second paragraph in. It said, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotions. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. So I think, this may not qualify, but I think that the reason why I had picked that out was for the person who's listening to this, and it was as a Christmas suggestion from one of their family members that they might have a problem, qualify that. Ask yourself those questions and say to yourself, do you have a problem with your personal relationships? Do you have a problem with your emotional natures? Are you depressed? Do you feel useless? It may not even be that you still have a job. I mean, I had a job, but I still felt useless. You know what I mean? So if I'm still feeling useless, ultimately I'm unhappy. And if I'm being unhappy, then what's going on is all these things are running riot. And we call that an unmanageable life.
And that would say you have to get out of yourself, right? And you have to go out and help somebody else.
Yes.
That's what you got to do, right?
Yeah.
To get to that feeling of where you're feeling okay with yourself, right? Service work. Right?
Yeah. I mean, they said it in here right in the beginning. If you really want to know what is successful in recovery, it's about working with the other alcoholic. And the other thing is to this too is, and I heard this early in my recovery career, was recovery is only going to take as long as you want it to take, and that's a simple fact. Yep. It can take you 3 years to become recovered, as in past tense, and you live through the process of recovery, or it can take you 3 days to find recovery and be recovered by Monday. It all depends on how much motivation you have and how much you really, really want to be living in a place where no longer do you have this doom and gloom cloud of addiction. And if these things are kicking your ass in this unmanageable life, like your family doesn't want you around anymore. Your drinking has isolated you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be around people. You're having a hard time at work because you want to check out at 2:30 in the afternoon. I mean, those are the issues that are glaring. Those are the hard, cold facts. You're never going to change them. As much as we all had that dream that we could somehow learn to drink and use like a normal person. Nobody using cocaine is a normal person.
Yeah, there's no recreational cocaine users out there.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, it comes to bite you in the ass if you continue to do what you're doing.
Yeah, there's also no recreational heroin users out there.
No, or alcoholics either, right? It comes to get you, right?
I mean, there are people who drink recreationally, but you and I can't conceive of that idea.
No.
We don't understand, like, well, can't you just have 2 glasses of wine? Well, I could, but why would I?
Yeah.
Like you can quickly qualify yourself if you see the humor in this joke. When you go if you go in front of a judge and the judge says to you, Mr. So-and-so, if you have another drink, you're going to jail. And your first thought is, gee, I wonder what they're drinking in jail. You're probably an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Like normal people don't think there's sufficient enough reason to quit drinking in that moment when your judicial health is in a situation of that nature. That's just what it is. The other reading that we had here is when we became alcoholic, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was the choice to be? So let's unpack the word God. What does God mean to you today?
Today, it means my higher power. It means that someone that is there with me in every aspect of my life. He's loving, he's caring, and he is my guiding light, right?
So what was your God before today?
Well, my God before today was, I got it out of the Bible, the readings in the Bible, and
did that make any sense to you?
No, it really didn't, because even in the Bible it talks about violence and adultery and stuff like that, and most of the wars that I associated were based on religion, right? The richest group in the world, Roman Catholic. Right?
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of those things. We hear in the big book a word called chicanery, right? And chicanery basically means, how can you create a war? It's a hypocrisy. You create a war based upon spiritual beliefs. It's a holy war. How do those two words come together?
Yeah, how do they come together? Yeah.
And I can even say the same thing. Like in my early recovery, I found spirituality before I found religion, but I identified with the Catholic Church in regards to this is probably the less likely offensive way to my God of my understanding. What I've come to understand today is I try to imitate Christ only because Christ is the only person that I know of in history that has never had an issue with anybody in the world. So if I can imitate Christ to the best of my ability in my life, then likely most people don't have issue with me. And if they do have issue with me, it's probably not something that I've imposed upon them. It's more likely that it's their own issue with themselves, right? Yeah. But what I'm getting at as well is that our gods have changed from the beginning. Because I remember you used to say at one time your higher power was your dog. Right? And that was something that worked for you, and then all of a sudden now it's evolved or changed into something that's not of this earth. It's more something that's out there that you've been able to create the characteristics for, right? Yep. Because they say, and I think this is the biggest issue that people have with AA, and I hear this, I work with counselors, right, from I call secular world, which is not in the AA world or CA world or big book, blue book friendly world. I think one of the things is, and they hear this all the time from their clients, is that I don't like the God thing. That word God only means whatever you want it to mean.
Yes. It took a long time for me to get there with that.
Yeah. So what was it that signified that you could make up this God of your understanding?
I don't know. Maybe a walk through the steps and hitting that steps 2 and 3, and then just sitting down and thinking about it. Just really thinking about it, right? I want sobriety. I want to be clean and sober. So I just glommed onto something that was there but not there. You know what I mean? And I think the thing came was when I really wanted to be clean and sober. I didn't want to use drugs or alcohol anymore, and I just wanted something different than what I had, because what I had was no damn good.
Yeah.
Right? So you can fight for so long, right? But why fight? Why not just give in, believe, and think, okay, there's a purpose for you to be here.
Yeah.
What is that purpose, right? My higher power will give that to me when I'm ready, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's nice to let go a little bit, right? That surrendering, right?
Yes, it is.
And I think there comes like that reading said, God was either everything or else he was nothing.
Yep.
He either is or it isn't.
Yep.
And I think that's that's the precipice where you have to go, because nobody in AA is saying believe in the church. Nobody in any of these blue book friendly places is saying you have to believe in the same God. I mean, there's Buddhists that we know within our fellowship. There's also evangelicals. There's also people who are complete atheists who don't believe in a God at all, but they can at least conceive to some sort of something that they cannot control in this world. And that's really all it boils down to. God is a label. And the definition of that label is whatever you decide it's going to be.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's what you decide it's going to be, right?
It's one of these things, too. There's a reading that we hear where it says God will change many times. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? It fucking better change many times, because if your God isn't changing, you're not evolving yourself. Your spiritual growth is stagnant, right? I mean, we did Sober October a little while ago. And in Sober October, I had to go and start meditating like a monk from the Tibetan world, right? So, I mean, I used to, I still pray a rosary and I still meditate in a Catholic way, but then to go and meditate in a Buddhist way, which was a completely different philosophy, and the way that it's done was really enlightening. It really opened my mind to that I don't have to be just one singular dimension. It's beneficial for me to be of all. Right?
Changing.
Yeah. It's beneficial to do those things. So the other reading that we have here real quick, and I think, so this is on page 164. This is the last page in the stuff that really matters in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will consistently disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answer will come. If your own house is in order, but obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road to happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, that gives me goosebumps when I hear that.
It telling you to believe in God and all that stuff, but it's also telling you got to do a little bit of work in that to get there, right? And, and life isn't easy. It's not a bowl of cherries, right? But when you relieve yourself of the drinking or the drug problem, that's the start, right? That's the start of a life that you can feel a hell of a lot better about yourself and pull yourself out of a lot of isolation, right?
You remember, we'll talk I'll just get a little bit personal here, and you can disclose whatever you want. But I remember when you and I first met, the hurricane of shit I lived in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It was just a fucking hurricane of shit, whether it be the judicial issues, the girl issues, the fucking fellowship issues, the sponsee issues, the I know best issues, all that bullshit. At the end of the day, when it all watered down, I'm better for it because it was trudging the road to Dusty happiness. And I remember, we would sit back and I, the 2-3 in the morning phone calls, and it would be like, Larry, I can't do this. I just can't take this. And the only thing you would say is, as bad as it is right now, it's going to get worse, and then it's going to get better. And as good as it seems, it's going to get better than that, and then it's going to get worse again. And you said the only thing that's going to keep you consistent is your understanding of your God, and going to the meetings and doing these things that work. And for anybody out there who is waking up hungover because they shit the bed on sobriety, look at. A bad relapse is only a bad relapse if you didn't learn anything from it. Mm-hmm. If you can honestly sit back and say, there's not a damn thing I learned from this relapse, well, then that's unfortunate because that's a bad relapse. The relapses that will always mean something is the one where you say, yeah, shit, yeah, that was probably a bad situation to be in, and you don't go back to it, right? Mm-hmm. You and I both know somebody who has over 120 relapses. Yeah. And the stories that he has, right? Mm-hmm. But the only thing that I can imagine, because I'm not a relapser, I'm a first-time kicker. The only thing I can imagine is sitting back. I don't think I could use knowing how I hurt people before, right? I don't think I could do that today, and I only have empathy or even some sort of compassion towards somebody who's gone through that relapse. Because I said to you many, many times in early recovery, I don't understand why these fucking people are relapsing. I just don't get it because sobriety is so good. Unfortunately, I didn't listen, and I was we have a new blogger that's coming out. And one of the things that she said, that this person had said, was that they were told not to be in a relationship in their first year of recovery.
Oops.
Yeah, and they said, well, nobody knows if that really works because nobody's really ever done it. Ha ha. And then this person also said that they were pregnant within the first 3 months of recovery, right? And I also was in a relationship in the beginning of my recovery, and it did not do me well at all. I think that's the one scrape that we all fall into.
Yes.
I would suggest it's because of that isolation piece. We're so afraid to be alone. Yeah. But as we've heard from somebody in the rooms before, why the fuck is it that you need a rebuild?
Yes.
Go rebuild yourself so that you can get something brand spanking new. And
it is an isolation when you get to a point in recovery where you're feeling good about yourself and you can be alone. And if it does get to that way, then go and do some service work. Go and do something for someone that's that's less fortunate than you because they don't have the steps or whatever.
Yeah.
You come up to these Petro-Canadas and that, and they're standing out the side of the door and they got their hand out. Giving them money isn't the answer, right?
Yeah.
I found that out quite a while ago, and I was there about 2 weeks ago, and some girl walks by and said, "Got $20?" Wow, what the audacity of that is, right? I said, "No." A little while later, she came back, "You got a cigarette?" I said, "Sorry, honey, you got a guy who doesn't smoke." The next day, I went to the same place, and the guy standing there, he's opening the door. "Got any change?" I said, "No, I'm not giving you change." I said, "I'll buy you a coffee." She says, "Yeah, sure." Well, he came inside with me. I bought him a large triple, and he was happy for a while. So, you know what I mean? It's if I can help somebody in the positive way, not in a negative way, because giving these people change is not the good thing to do, right?
Well, and I think that's, you and I kind of understand what enabling is.
Yep.
So even to corner that for the family, I understand that this is going to be a time of great guilt for families, thinking that you've done something for this family member of yours to be in active addiction. I'm going to spell it out for you. You did nothing.
Yep.
You did nothing.
You only made it worse, right?
By giving in to their whims and needs.
Yep.
You haven't fucked them up when they were kids in order for them to be going into active addiction. The fact of the matter is that they were going to go into active addiction regardless of whatever you had done.
Yes.
People come from great families and people come from shitty situations into active addiction. Addiction does not discriminate. It doesn't give a shit if you're purple, blue, or red. All it gives a fuck is that it wants your money and it wants you to answer the toll of what your active addiction tells you you need to do in order to get that substance into your body. So as parents, when you're looking at your loved one or your family member who's in active addiction, whether that be spouse, brother, son, daughter, doesn't matter, you need to recognize that you haven't done anything for them to be in that situation.
And unfortunately, the best thing you could do is probably, you could direct them to a meeting, but you could also kick them to the curb for a while just to see if they can bounce back on their own. It's a life learning lesson. Everyone has to know that they are worth it. And they'll take it for every penny they can if you're giving, right?
Well, and I think the other thing is you're not dealing with your son or your daughter anymore. You're dealing with an addict, and that's not what you raised.
It's a different ball of wax.
Yeah,
right?
it's best for people like us who are in the meetings to deal with your family members, because we know. See, we call this thing depth and weight. Any addict who's listening to this podcast right now, the only reason why they're intrigued is because, one, we're not sitting in front of them. Secondly, we're talking about emotions that we have all felt. It has nothing to do with circumstances or situations. It has everything to do with the actual feelings and emotions of sitting in that place.
They can identify with us, right?
You can taste, smell, and see things differently when you're drunk that you just can't, or high, that you just can't when you're sober. And only a drunk knows a drunk in that way, whether we're sober or we're drunk.
Yeah.
That's the only reason why we qualify with them. And that depth and weight from honesty of what we've lived through makes sense. It makes sense to anybody who's drinking and using. All I can tell you is, for the family, your best efforts are to be honest. Do not hide from what the situation is. I mean, my mom used to tell me this. I would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm drunk today, Mom." My mom would say to me, she'd say, "Well, your stories account for fuck all.
Yeah.
The only thing that matters is when you actually make a damn change."
Mm-hmm.
You know? And she just started saying, "I don't accept your apologies anymore." Right? I don't accept your sorry. Right? And that's a hard hit for a kid to hear.
Well,
you know?
Lied so many times and scammed her so many times that they just lose faith until you can get to a place where they feel good that you're coming back to where you should be, right?
So you were saying that your folks kind of stopped calling you.
Yep.
Did that go for a long time prior to you coming into sobriety, or was it like off and on?
It was for quite a while, but you know, if your parents love you, they're not going to abandon you. Because I know my mom wanted to call, but my dad would just say, "Just leave them alone," right? And it was probably the best thing for all three of us, and the rest of the family, because then I got to the point where, you know, I don't have my family, I don't have any friends, and what the heck am I going to do? And I'm no longer partying because I'm hiding in the house by myself and tiptoeing around and looking through the curtains, right? And I'm very quiet, and it's a great party by yourself, right? Just doing the same thing over and over again. It finally, and it didn't take long, right? For me, it didn't take long. You know, the shadow people, and I heard a guy say last night, "Well, the shadow people were real. They even came in to talk to me." That's getting a little far for me, but they never came in to talk to me, but they were there. So yeah. That was probably the best thing they ever did, right?
Yeah.
Because towards the end of it, I was coming out of it and going, "God, there's got to be something better than this. There has to be," right?
Yeah.
And then, God, I got to find God in these rooms.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, wow, it's changing. My life is turning around. It's because I've done some work on myself, right? That was my biggest thing. I never did any work on myself all the time growing up. It took until I got into the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous to start realizing I was worth it. Mm-hmm. I was a good person, and I mattered. Right?
Yeah. I've often said this: the true deficiency of a person in active addiction is the fact that they have no self-esteem.
That's right. Yep.
You know, that's the true deficiency. And there's nothing that a family member can do to give that person self-esteem because it's not validated by the addict. All it is, it's just a bullshit. It's a it's just lip service. It's just bullshit to the addict. You could tell me all day long when I'm in active addiction, oh, you're really a good guy. You just got to change the drugs. You just got to change the addiction. It doesn't qualify for me in my own head. I have to go from bottom to top. I'm the one who has to climb out of the hole.
I have to suffer that pain before I can get to anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
And it's not only Cocaine Anonymous help, but there's other things that helped me to get to a point today. But that was a foundation, right?
Yeah.
A really good foundation, right? And I went to a group called Men Without Hats.
Right? Here in the Edmonton area.
Yeah, and it's a city-run organization, and that's spun off into Hearts That Dare. They call it HTD. They're running into a little bit of financial trouble now. Well, they're thinking of cutting some stuff, but without that and finding out a whole bunch of guys that share the same stuff I went through as a kid and all that relationship issues, I probably still be suffering some isolation. It's an in-depth look at yourself, and it is unbelievable to feel like it was probably better for me to go there than Dakota, right?
Yeah.
Codependency thing, right?
Yeah, so, Codependence Anonymous,
It was where I needed to be at the time I needed to be there, right? I fell into it, right?
Well, and I think that's one of the issues, too, is trying to learn those boundaries.
Yeah.
You can. I always say that I learned a lot of my boundaries. Well, from the sponsees. I had quite a bit of sponsees at one time, and then what ended up happening is these motherfuckers would just railroad me and then go right through my boundaries, and then it was up to me ultimately. And I know I'm like pointing the finger at them like they just ran through my boundaries, but it was ultimately up to me to say you're not going past these lines. Yep. And then I would also do this with my partners, because I was still learning who the hell I was, and unfortunately what I did in that time was I stunted myself from any real personal relationship with the opposite sex because I wasn't really looking at myself. I was always out of myself. And I needed to learn with sponsees what boundaries are in an amicable way. And as soon as they cross them, I'm the one who has to not be adversarial, but to be more dominant in the context of assertiveness in a positive way, saying this can't fly. I'm sorry that this has happened, but we're not going along this way. You know,
the sponsees, they don't sometimes consider you because they're still in that muck and mire.
Yeah.
And I had one guy that was supposed to meet me at a place on a Sunday. Well, I went there. He never showed up.
Yeah.
And my answer to him was, "You're not ready, so sorry.
Yeah.
Find somebody else."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, I was with my child."
Well, why didn't I know that?
Pick up your phone.
Yeah.
Give me a call. I have a guy now that we did 1, 2, and 3, and he kind of disappeared on me.
Yeah.
And I talked to him yesterday, and he said, "Well, step 4 is taking longer." I said, "No, just get the glaring stuff out. Get the glaring stuff out.
Yeah.
Get that down. Come and see me. We'll walk through it after we do all our readings, right?" And I said, "We can go back and visit it again. It's not a big deal, right?"
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There's something magical that happens. If you want the gift of sobriety over the Christmas holidays, this is the way to be. This is the way to get it, is, in my opinion. It's not the only way, but it is definitely, it can be a successful way for many people, is get yourself to a meeting, sign up to that first big book study, go and do the steps while you're doing the big book study. And as quick as you go through that big book study, that's how quickly you will be recovered, right?
Yes.
So that's our hour. I'm going to wrap up the show now. So for anybody who's listening, please subscribe and share to all of your friends. Where can you find the after show blog is at www.lifeonlifestermspodcast.com. So that's basically like the final thoughts of the show. It's a great page. And we would ask that you become a Pride member. How you do that? It's entirely free. All you have to do is just give us your email, put it on our list, and we will not sell it to any of our sponsors. We won't be selling it to anybody where you're going to get spam mail from us. What you'll end up getting is only our content updates. Thank you for listening. Thanks for coming in, Larry. I think this was a great episode, and there's a lot of value to a lot of people out there who are struggling with active addiction and sobriety.
Thanks for allowing for me to be of service. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. So for all you listeners, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you in next week.
God bless.
Bye for now.